All right, we're recording. Okay, so back to it. So this is where we started off in the landforms, specifically of the Middle East. And so we first see proper names. We see Zagros, Elburz, and Taurus. All those are mountains, and they are never mentioned again. So probably don't need to know that. However, Suez Canal is. Suez Canal, right. Now, do you guys know where the Suez Canal is? No. This is the Middle East that this whole section is on.
What? The Middle East is Western.
That's the same difference. Remember, Western Asia is relative. It's to the west of Asia, but we call it the Middle East, because from our perspective, it's from the east. Anyways, back to the original question. Where is the Suez Canal? Right here. It connects the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. You should know that. Okay? It's an important transportation way, so to speak. Otherwise, the only other thing in here you need to know is what's the climate of the Middle East. What's the most common climate? It is
Dry.
well, that's a good description of it, but what's the actual climate?
In desert. Seems to be dry and
Desert's good, but the climate's called arid.
arid.
Arid. Semi-arid or arid. Desert, in other words.
So I'm just put desert.
Let's put arid. One, it's less words. A-R-I-D. Less letters, I should say.
Oh, shoot.
Right? It's easier.
Thank you.
When Tigris and Euphrates, you should know that. And Fertile Crescent, of course, is the area in between those two rivers. By the way, the land between the rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, what do we call that? Mesopotamia. Very good. And that pretty much is all that. Shows the whole thing. Now, it talks about a few different things. You should probably know the qanats. Again, proper names. The qanats, what are they? They're irrigation trenches. Yep. Well, it'd be helpful to know that they're in Persia, yeah. If you just put qanat from Persia, they are irrigation ditches, and that's pretty much that. Okay? Those are the qanats. Now we're on to India. So again, we've got a whole mess of different mountains, including the tallest mountains in the world, which are the Himalayas. Very good. And what's the tallest mountain in the Himalayas? Not Everest. It's a different mountain range entirely. And what's the deadliest mountain in the world?
K2.
K2. Letter K, number 2. And then we have others divided up to a whole bunch of different things, agriculture, all kinds of fun stuff. All kinds of spices from this area, such as cinnamon and sugar, as you well know. And what's the most common climate in India? I appreciate a good JK. All right, moving on to South Asia. Lots of forests. We're still in South Asia. Including sandalwood, other spices, and also stealing rain. That's the same thing, sorry. I had a brain fart. It's still India.
Oh.
So nothing really there of interest.
Just the mountains and the
Pretty much. From this section. So then we talk about wet and dry seasons, and of course it's tropical, but specifically we get into these seasonal winds, which are called, right? And basically how some major concerns are pollution and deforestation. We have, of course, the standard monsoon season, and when it gets a bit extreme. And now we're having a look at the eastern part of Asia, specifically China to begin with. And we have the Huanghe, which is the Yellow River. You should know both of those names. And the Changjiang, or Yangtze. You should know both of those as well. And as a side note, you should also know the Three Gorges Dam. Talked about that a couple different times. That is on the Yangtze. Three Gorges Dam. It's on this river. The Changjiang-Yangtze is the same river, just two names. The Huanghe and Yellow River are two names for the same river. That happened a lot in China because when the British took over, they kind of renamed things a lot. Like why Beijing became Peking.
Wait, so the Chang, and Yangtze River are the same?
You got it.
Okay. What do you need to know about it?
Basically, you need to know these are interchangeable for the same place, and these are interchangeable for the same place, and this last two has the Three Gorges Dam.
Okay.
And to remind you about that, that was what I was talking about yesterday, where they dammed up the river and ended up flooding all these areas that people used to live in, forced them off the land. But it also provides hydroelectric power that was necessary for people to live a modern lifestyle. So, power's got to be generated. Mm-hmm. Next up, talk about population density, talk about no rice because of the area it grows in, talk about natural resources, developing economically, talk about all these different types of things. So basically, nothing of too terrible interest there. That's, again, Three Gorges Dam. And we didn't really say a specific climate that's most common throughout this area, though tropical is probably the most people tend to think about. That being said, that's not 100% accurate for China because it's actually pretty diverse. I mean, a good chunk of the west is actually a freaking desert. But that's the dam right there. And you can actually see it on this map. Right there. And basically, in a nutshell, it provides power. We talked about the building on landfills in Japan. That would be important to know. It's one of the ways of dealing with population density. And the other idea is this, which you guys remember, which are?
Airplane.
Those are capsule hotels.
They look like the thing in Lilo and Stitch. The little thing.
626.
And that's one on the inside. That's it for that slideshow. Isn't that exciting?
Yeah.
All right, next up we had human geography. Bring it back up to duplicate. I wish it would just stay on that, but it doesn't. It's probably my fault. So we're going to get to a lot of particulars. Now here's where we get into the pile of stuff involving religion. Yeah?
Now tell us your favorite.
So what do you know about this? Pretty much most of it, in some fashion. Obviously, the most common practiced faith in this area is Islam. The most common language is, of course, Arabic. Know who Muhammad was. You should be able to identify all 5 of the pillars of faith. You should also know that there are 3 sects of Islam, and that the 3 main monotheistic faiths all originate from this area. So like I said, pretty much all of that. That's the Hajj. Theocracy is a term you should know. It means rule by religion. So if democracy is ruled by the many, theocracy is ruled by a religious institution. So like, not only Muslim theocracies, but also the pharaohs in ancient Egypt, that's a theocracy. And then we talk about all that stuff. Zionism, you should know what that is. You guys remember what Zionism is? Baller. Not much in terms of economics that we're going to use for multiple choice. Might be an essay. All right, a couple empires we talked about, Mauryan and the Mughal dynasties in India, and the British. In fact, they are a parliamentary system of governments, and that Pakistan was at one point part of India until they separated in 1947. The Green Revolution might be good to know. That's basically when they started using more farming technology to increase the food production in India. Otherwise, not too much on this slide. You might want to know that the most commonly spoken language in India is Hindi. Basically, not only should you know all the different climates, but you should also know what the most common languages are in these places. So like China is clearly Chinese, but even much of East and Southeast Asia are languages based upon Chinese. Just how like in East Asia the most common religion is Buddhism, and in India the most common religion is Hinduism, as it says right there. Other religions that were found in this area are, of course, Buddhism and Sikhism. Know what a jati is? The caste system. A caste system, yeah. A caste is basically a social hierarchy where like you're born into a position in society, and that determines what kind of job you can have, who you can be friends with, who you can marry, basically where you're going to be socially and basically everything until you die. You can't move between castes. It's rigid. As opposed to our society where we pretty much just treat you however we want to based on how much money you have. You know, that's how we determine class. But that also means it's flexible because anybody can become really wealthy. And then poetry is a pretty important form of expression in Pakistan. As far as China, know what a dynasty is? It means ruling family. Yeah, communism is the type of government in China. It's actually one party dominated system. And that's pretty much it there.
So you said a dynasty is what?
A ruling family. And again, there's not a whole lot here about specific terms. We did mention that Taiwan had emerged as a economic powerhouse in East Asia, as well as a few others. Of course, we talked about Buddhism being the main faith, but also Confucianism and Taoism were spread there. Confucianism is based off the teachings of, guess what? Confucius. And is kind of the basis for their testing system, the whole shebang. Basically their government forms. And that is that for that slideshow. And certainly not last, this is honestly mostly going to be stuff for your essay, because one of your essays is on modern issues. But one of the things we talked about in terms of problems is, of course, pollution. Whenever you develop industrially, you have to deal with the problems of pollution. We have border disputes, such as between Pakistan and India over the lands of Jammu and Kashmir, and then between Palestine and Israel over the Gaza Strip. These often turn into violent conflicts, but it's often using terrorist organizations. So it's kind of hard to identify who is the real bad guy and who's a civilian. The next is income inequality. India is particularly high in that. And the biggest problem to deal with that is that there is a decided difference between those living in cities and those living in rural areas. Those living on farms don't really see the benefit of education, and so really you have to kind of go over that to make that, or get over that in order to develop. This also kind of rolls into population density in both India and China. They have a significant population, and the way that China tried to deal with the one-child rule, but basically that had some kind of negative consequences. For one, their population really dramatically dipped, way more so than they even anticipated, because people preferred boys, and so girls are often given up for adoption or killed, and basically create a major problem. So they're reversing that now. But really, it's a cultural change as much as anything else. So the only other thing really we talked about in that was HIV/AIDS. How it is the second largest outbreak of HIV/AIDS on the planet. And the way they're trying to deal with that is much the same as in Africa, education spread around how you stop the disease and things like that. Any questions?
No.
Okay, I'll stop the recording then.